Good evening, everybody. Brian here. I thought for ease and for speed, instead of me being in a position where I tried to type this all out, I just shoot a video. And it allows for me to upload this video to the Winding Road website for a little bit of a personal touch. Um, in the last 3 weeks, a question has been circulating around, and I'm starting to think that this is something I either needed to write about or I needed to post a video with regards to my thoughts and my feelings as it relates to race and my sect of paganism, which is the Etruscan Dianic Tradition. Because it was Black History Month, I had two pagan chaplains ask me the question as to whether or not there were Afrocentric focuses in the Etruscan Dianic tradition. And then I was asked if my rituals that I perform are African in origin. Um, More specifically, one of the chaplains asked me the question as to whether or not I chose a pagan path that had anything to do with my race. Um, my answers were the following. Race for my tradition does not come into it and is not a subject that is on the table. I do not in any way, shape, form, or other teach that Hecate has a race, um, or is of a race or of a racial nature, or is even associated with what it is that human beings appear as here in this earth. It's not something that I even think about in my worship or in my conveyance of her many virtues, her honors, or in guiding people as to why I worship the Lady Hecate and trying to introduce them to her to such a degree that they themselves choose to worship her. As many of you may know, the Lady Hecate has three faces. Um, More commonly referred to as being triune in nature, or the Triformis, Maiden, Mother, and Crone. Um, but more specifically, in the ancient texts and ancient writings, she's said to have a head of a serpent, um, one that is the head of a lion, and one that is akin to a horse. Obviously, according to ancient myths, we have lots of stories anecdotally of spirits crossing over into the human plane of existence and taking on forms that are easily digested by human beings. But a true occultist that studies myth and mythology as it relates to gods comes to the understanding that mankind cannot possibly comprehend what a deity actually looks like. And because primarily it's the world dominant religion, I'd like to speak and will be speaking from a standpoint comparatively between the Etruscan Dianic tradition and what I learned when I was once a Christian. the the studies that I performed as a theologian who was once Christian has actually taught me in many ways that there is an inherent danger when someone ascribes physicalities very much like human beings to their gods. Um, Within Christianity, there are six sects of Christianity currently that, as a result of the sin of Cain when he killed his brother Abel, believe that one of the offspring of Abel, carrying the mark of what's referred to as the mark of Ham, is signaled the introduction of skin pigment to individuals, and that any individual that bears the mark of Ham within Christianity and the sects of Christianity, they believe that no human being who has skin pigment um, or the dark skin that came as a result of Ham's offspring, that these individuals can't inherit God's kingdom. Now, imagine that language being given to you as a person who's trying to learn about God and is trying to develop a relationship with a God. What would that do to you? Of course, it's going to damage you. Absolutely. We live in a current culture at this point in time where, excuse me, white supremacy is finding its way into pagan culture. Most specifically because it's something I've spoken to. People are aware of the fact that there's a huge issue within Ossetru. But in Eastern European, my apologies, in Eastern Europe right now, there's also the issue of white supremacy infiltrating the Golden Dawn. In one way or the other, race is being pushed into religion, and I'm basically saying at this point in time that there are inherent dangers in allowing for these types of things to stand, or to even have conversations as it relates to race, as it relates to how we approach our gods. Now, uniquely as it relates to the Ossetru path or even Vanitru individuals, I understand why race is a part of the understanding of their gods. According to the heathen mythos that I read when I was considering becoming a heathen many moons ago, it is known that the Norse gods at one point in time were actually humans. And they did have human visages. So the blonde hair, blue-eyed like notions and them being Scandinavian, that actually makes complete and total sense why race is on the table for them in terms of their gods. But then again, these individuals were elevated to godly forms and they left this particular plane. And that, again, in a nutshell, is their myths that I'm speaking to. So I understand the propensity and the ease within which white supremacy finds its way into that, because their myths are on record as establishing that these individuals were of Aryan descent. But again, what's actually happening within those particular religions and how they've been rebranded by Stephen McNallen, it becomes absolutely clear inherently that there are dangers by associating human understandings as to what gods actually look like to these gods as they're actually being worshipped. When it came back to me being asked about the Etruscan Dianic tradition and whether or not I was a person who believed there were Afrocentric understandings of things in my path, and how was it black for me? In a nutshell, that was the question that was being asked. I found myself stating that it's not a subject that's on the table for me. And the reason that it's not on the table for me is that I understood as a former Christian the inherent dangers that were present as a result of people having idols and people worshiping images of what they thought God looked like. And I took them as pagan chaplains to the understanding of what was written in the scriptures. Thou shalt not have engraven images. What did people actually think was going to end up happening the second you sit back and you describe a God in human form, that mankind's propensity to seek superiority in any way, shape, form, or other, of course, whatever race group that you assign images to somehow is going to end up being weaponized, and therein is provided a stain or a taint that is carried down generation after generation. And then we have the issues right now that mankind is faced with. At this point in time, if you're paying attention to social media, there are like large movements at this point in time where people are abandoning the notion of white Jesus. They're rejecting it. Going further than that, not only are they rejecting the notion of white Jesus, but remaining Christian, you have individuals who are also rejecting white Jesus, and then moving into what they believe are ancestral forms of worship, namely as people of color, black people of color, voodoo, Yoruba worship, Orishi, things of this nature. There's a huge movement with regards to this at this point. And then, if I didn't say it, voodoo as well. When asked the question, did I find myself in a position where I was attracted to voodoo? I did open up books of voodoo. I did study it. I, for my part, while I recognize it's very powerful in a number of ways, ultimately came to the conclusion that that was not a path for me. Even as a child, I recognized my attraction to the Greco-Roman pantheons and the myths that were associated with that. And namely that when these gods actually crossed over into our world, in many instances, they didn't take on human forms. They appeared as animals. Zeus was known to seduce people by transforming himself into golden swans or birds of prey. These were animal forms that were actually like selected rather than trying to even come close to looking like a human being. And more akin to what I stated previously, which is that gods, if they crossed over in ancient times into this world, they could take on easily digested forms, but this does not mean that that's what they actually like thoroughly looked like. Going back to Christianity, as well as my studies of the Goetia as it relates to ceremonial magic, there are powerful radiations and forms of energy that these entities manifest. One of my teachers basically indicated that if you were to ask one of the Goetia or even an Enochian spirit to provide healing to you, that they don't comprehend exactly how much energy the human body can actually withstand. So yeah, you could ask them to heal a broken bone and they have the ability to heal said broken bone, but the energy that's provided to the body is so toxic and powerful, it might actually give you cancer. And that there are whole testimonials with regards to this in writing from a ceremonial magic standpoint. Turning back to Christianity, we're in a set of circumstances where it's spoken to that Moses, when just in the presence of God as the tablets were being engraved in fire on Mount Sinai, just being near the radiation of that power actually changed his skin pigment and turned his hair white. That's indicative of cellular damage. And that's not the full magnitude of what God actually is, according to the Christian pantheon that he was in touch with. What I'm trying to demonstrate by providing these examples are to be near the full glory of what it is that we may worship and to see it in its entirety. I'm of the learned opinion it would blast you to powder. Yes, there's a spirit that actually speaks to me. Yes, I believe it's associated with Hecate. Yes, I've actually asked the question and she says that it's Hecate. Do I think that I'm actually seeing Hecate's visage? No, I don't. I don't think I'm seeing that at all. Am I being approached by something that's easily digested and that has the ability to commune with me in this form and impart information? Yes. Am I hung up on how she looks? No. No, I'm not. Because that's not the point. The point is she exists. The point is that the wisdom has the ability to be able to be provided. And from my learned opinion and actually seeing it in real time, there are inherent dangers in assigning race to gods. When gods are associated with what we understand as race, the chances of someone taking this information, twisting it or changing it based off of agenda, and then reintroducing it individuals will almost certainly find themselves in a position of feeling as if they have been ostracized in some way because of how the information is being disseminated. Given mankind's propensity to weaponize knowledge or to deliberately keep individuals stupid, one could easily see how this is a gateway to deeper societal problems by associating deity, however we read about it, and however we experience it in terms of unverified personal gnosis. It can be a problem. As I said to the chaplains, it's more important to me how I'm inspired by my worship of the Lady Hecate to apply my gifts. It's more important to me how I serve my goddess, and demonstrably how I see that she rewards me for my service, but that's not the goal. It's more important to me how I'm transformed by her presence and how that presence is actualized in my day-to-day life as a practitioner. I would humbly submit that to all of you, this is food for thought that should not easily be dismissed. We live in a current climate where race is being applied to absolutely everything. This is a pure source path, namely I'm speaking to the Etruscan Dianic Tradition, that I personally feel like needs to be maintained and must be treated in such a way that we preserve its ability to remain untainted. This, by the way, is why I speak to the significant differences between the old Dianic tradition and the new Dianic tradition. Here's what I identify as being a taint or a stain. The fact that women have been abused in society throughout time, the fact that the rights of women, their bodies have been violated, the fact that it is historically understood the inherent differences that patriarchy pushes onto females. The current leader of the new Dianic tradition has removed all gods from its pantheon. It has provided only females specifically to its pantheon. It provides a wheel of worship that removes all gods from this. It is a faith that is accessible to women only, and as a result, ostracizes all males. One could easily see how a angry, patriarchal, hungry male might find that this particular path is not only intimidating that it actually exists, but inherently may attract hatred. From the new Dianic standpoint, lesbians and lesbianism for biologically female individuals is acceptable. In the Etruscan Dianic tradition, the divine feminine is sought to be manifested in males and should be developed. And as it relates to females, the divine masculine is requested to be cultivated and to be made manifest within them. Transgender individuals are allowed as a result to exist within the Etruscan or Old Dianic tradition. As it relates to what's been rebranded by Zuzana Budapest, you have individuals that adamantly try to ostracize an entire people as a result of what they understand the goddesses actually to look like, and what they understand to be what it means to be feminine, and all that is female. And then you have groups of individuals that also then are in a position where they're experiencing ostracization as well. My point ultimately in this is we have to be very careful about our language unless we fully, thoroughly understand exactly what it is that we're doing by branding things, specifically the way that they are branded. Because once that's actually done, things are put in nice, neat little boxes. And then unfortunately you have what actually has the ability to be a beautiful religion that can provide many forms of spiritual ointment and or healing being diminished, if not completely destroyed. My answers back to the chaplains were that in order for me to find out about my heritages, I had to do DNA testing. It would be impossible for me to be in a position where I would understand exactly where on the African continent I hailed from without DNA testing being done, because all aspects of what it meant to be Black in the United States was completely and totally obliterated. And you have a bunch of people scrambling throughout the generations here in the United States to find some semblance of an identity when there was no identity to be able to be found. But what you did also have was identity being created. This is why we've been here in the United States. Black, Afro-American, African-American, Negro, and any other flavor du jour of the month like name, scrambling to find some semblance of identity. Now that DNA testing actually exists, of course I absolutely went and I checked to find out exactly where I hail from. And as it relates to like true occultism and occult power being found in ancestral lines, this is necessary to be known. You really do want to know exactly what bloodlines you actually possess, because tracing those bloodlines does give some connotation as to understanding where your power may come from if you possess true occult power. I'm speaking to blood magic. But outside the scope of that, I don't find any value in doing any additional deep dives into it, because I don't want racism being applied to what it is that's being done. Again, I speak primarily to what I see actually happening in the Norse heathen pantheons. This is the only thing that I can actually cite that validates my opinions. If I desired to practice voodoo, which I did look into voodoo, it was completely on the table that I could have become a voodoo practitioner. Ultimately, after doing my research and whatever, I rejected it. As it relates to turning to it, ancestrally speaking, I see the beauty of choosing to go that route ancestrally if you keep it pure. But again, race has a way of finding its way into things. There was a Samhain in particular where a beautiful ritual was performed by a Romani gypsy person of a voodoo nature, and a gourd was broken in order to conjure a spirit. I didn't realize it, but I was experiencing the beginnings of possession by a mambo. And later on, that mambo spoke to me as I slept. And not in my voice or from any place that I would actually communicate to a person. I was asked the question by this spirit, who does white boy think he do voodoo magic? At least several times as I dreamed, this mambo confronted me with its own racism and its rejection, not a god, but simply a spirit, the spirit of a mambo or a priestess, conveyed to me as I slept its racism. From all sides, I'm basically sitting here saying, the second that we try to find a way to associate a look that is close to human and take it as being literal in terms of what its visage is, we have to look at our own dark hearts and we have to look at our own dark agendas. And from there, we will discover whether or not what we will introduce to people, if it remains pure, or if it's going to be turned into something that is filled, unfortunately, with darkness. And as in many things, lest we be concerned with the affairs of other people's, and more that we should be concerned with the affairs of our own dark heart. I am pleased to say that in none of the writings with regards to the Etruscan Dianic tradition when I first began reading in 1993 have anything whatsoever to do with race. And it was this information, but perhaps a little more eloquent, that I provided to those individuals. And I basically indicated to them, I'm pleased with the question. I'm pleased that they're very curious about my path. But I'm also pleased to say to you that race just simply does not come into it. And all we actually have to do is look at our current culture right now, and we will all understand the inherent dangers that we are being presented with in applying race to any form of spiritual worship. And that's all I really wanted to talk to you about. I'd be very curious to hear what your thoughts and your feelings are. You can please leave a comment in this thread, or once this is posted on the Winding Road site, if you have any questions as to what it is that I stated or if I left something out, please feel free to provide that. Blessed be. You have a good day.